And so we record all of these webinars and post them on our website. And so something new we've been doing this year, we also are linking it to our training portal. And so if you put that in your registration, you can always go out to our training portal. We'll provide the link, but there's also on our website, you can get to this ARM Academy training portal. And we will link your account to the recording for this webinar. And if you go in there, you can view the recording, and you can also generate a certificate to kind of show that you participated as well. So with that, we'll dive in here. As I introduced previously, this is day 2, data confirmation. So really, as soon as you put data into the ARM software, there's really should be a step of confirming that data. If you were out in the field and wrote down all the notes on a piece of paper, of course you want to confirm that those numbers are correct. But there's even a few more tools that we can use to really be sure that we put in the data correctly, and this assessment we performed is being entered into the software in the best fashion with no errors or mistakes. And so we're really trying to carve out a spot in this. A lot of the times I think the temptation is just as soon as data is in the program, let's create a report. Let's do the analysis. Well, we need to catch outliers, any issues with the assessment before we really start thinking about the analysis. And so that's really the data confirmation step that we're focusing on today. We talked about last time the different assumptions of AOV, and really an outlier breaks all of those. And so it's really important to catch outliers as they happen, so they're not affecting the analysis later on. And we hinted at a couple of the kind of harder to test assumptions of AOV really can be helped if you have an acceptable range of values before you take the assessment. That can be beneficial as well as you're actually doing the rating. So with that here, I will move over to ARM, and I just have an example trial, a fictitious trial here with one assessment that we'll pretend we just took and entered in to ARM. And so really just kind of go through the different tools we have in ARM for this data confirmation step, probably in the order that I would do them. I think there's maybe a slightly logical way to go through some of these tools, but certainly you can mix and match. There's no magic order here. They all are really viable to use. But the first one to kind of touch on that idea of the acceptable range of outcomes. That was one of the things we mentioned in the slides last time about the taking the data. And really, it kind of highlights one of the newer features here in ARM, actually added in the last couple of updates. The rating unit field kind of got a facelift a bit, and we combined a couple of areas. Previously, there was kind of two or three spots in ARM where you could put in the range of values. And so really we brought them all together here, and you may have noticed this in the last couple of ARM updates. Your rating unit is no longer just a unit, but it has a minimum and a maximum value as well that can get filled in. If I just show you the list for the rating unit, those columns also come with. And so if we look at something like a percent value, that is intrinsically between 0 and 100. That's the definition of a percent, is it needs to be between 0 and 100. And so previously you could find an ARM action code, I believe it was the letter P, that would make sure that all values that you enter are between 0 and 100. Well, instead of having in several different places people to go try to find that information now, it's all in one spot. So it's all going to be controlled with this minimum and maximum. And so in my case, the percent area isn't strictly necessarily between 0 and 100. In this case, though, if we look at the example I set up where we're looking at a a disease, how much of the leaf the disease is covering. Well, logically, you can't have more than 100%. So in that case, I could certainly put a 0 and a 100 in the minimum and maximum to insist on this limit. And then as you enter in the data, ARM can catch if you enter something that's outside of those range. And actually here, this popped up on my other screen, but there's actually a value here that falls outside those limits. And so this is the type of prompting you would see that ARM can catch right away if you're trying to enter a value that you've already kind of described as being invalid. So that's one tool, even just to catch the very instant that you're putting in the data, it can catch if you know that there's a logical boundary, and it wouldn't have to be a percent. It could be a rating scale 1 to 5. You put 1 to 5 in the minimum and maximum. Again, if your finger slips and you hit the number 6, ARM will catch it immediately when you're entering the data and say, this isn't right. So that can be useful just for putting in a range of what is valid. I'm going to cancel and just clear these out here just for just to kind of continue on our example. But that's really a very good first start, and that can even happen when you're setting up the protocol, or at least setting up the data headers before you go out and take the data. Is what's the logical range of values that I would see? And if it's actually a hard limit that it's physically, and literally impossible to have those limits, then the minimum and maximum might be a good place to have that, and put that in to make sure that there's checking. I do have a question here. If the data is copied and pasted into the assessment column, will the rating ranges be applied? That is a great question. Let's try here. I'm going to just copy that data, and let's just throw in a more or less a blank column, but we've got the 0 to 100, and let's just paste. So it looks like when you paste, it is not triggering that limit. So that's a great comment. I'm just grabbing a pen here. Thanks, Cecily. That's probably something we should just run past the programmers to see whether that could be by design, but certainly would seem like it might be nice to have that. So really here, the rating min max validation of sorts doesn't happen in the copy paste. And actually here I've comment, maybe if we save, we'll just see if any of the other actions gets triggered. I'm not sure about saving. Doesn't seem like it's triggered. If I validate the study, I'm not sure that's not necessarily part of the trial validation. So, yeah, that's a great catch. We will we'll definitely have to kind of take a closer look at that. Let me just, before we get too far, I will delete that example. We didn't change anything else. I'll just hit save just so that way I have my starting point again. But great question. Pasting in the information, you would not have that catch, at least at the moment. But I think we'll have some other tools today that you can see will also help us to catch a situation like that. So some of these other tools then may be even more important if you're copy and pasting the data from Excel or another source, to make sure we do catch odd values if it isn't just the min and max. And so really, I think the next tool, maybe even really the first tool per se, that we would use is the assessment map. I think this is one of the best hidden features in ARM. It's not very flashy. It's kind of stashed away here on your properties panel. For me, it's currently displayed, usually pops up by default. If you don't see the properties panel on your right side of your screen, and I'll pin mine to show that if it's hidden, usually you'll find it on the very, very right-hand side of your screen. I've got a few different words, and we'll actually pop open several of these. But right now, you look for just the word properties. And that'll open up this properties panel with a lot of different tools related to the assessment data. And in this case, we're looking for the section called Tools. And there's a button for the assessment map. So then whichever column of data that I'm currently have my cursor in, and right now I'm clicked into column 1, then we'll go over and press Assessment Map. And what this is really the trial map for the trial, but instead of coloring by treatment number or replicate number to show you randomization, we really are drawing a heat map of sorts from the data that is entered in this column. So ARM will take the lowest value, the highest value, and chop it up into up to 10 different colors or shades of this kind of green color here. And each plot correlates to the value that it has. And so you can see right now, there's not huge, we got a pretty wide range from 0 to 120. We ended up with just 6 buckets that actually have a value. And so we can see really spatially those values. If you view the options section here, we can actually draw to the true scale. And this keeps popping over onto my other screen, so I apologize. I'll have to keep moving it back and forth and see if I can fit it. It can mostly fit on my screen. Yep, it does. So what this will actually do, before it was just little squares to show you the location of the plots, but now with the true scale, it will actually draw each plot to scale according to the length and the width and all the alley settings that you have in settings. So this is really to scale what you would see out in the field. You can notice I don't have any alleys anywhere, and my plots are a lot taller than they are wide. And so this can really give a true spatial indication of what's happened here in this assessment. So again, this is just assessment column number 1. If I had more data columns, you can kind of flip pretty quickly between them with the next and previous. This is all empty. I only have 2 data columns in my trial, but if we're reviewing multiple data columns at once, maybe Cecily pasted 10 columns of data from her spreadsheet, then it's easy to kind of step through each one as we go. So looking at the map here, maybe I'll go back to this color description to see that really the darker the plot is, the larger the assessment value. And in our case with our percent of disease, really the worse off we were at controlling the disease would essentially be what we're looking at. So some of the tools here we can use. There is a little checkbox here in the corner, color by current treatment. And if you turn that on, then when you click into a plot, if I click on plot 101, it will only color the treatment 3s, because treatment 3 is at plot 101. It will only color treatment 3 across the map. And so that can give you a real nice glance at that particular treatment's performance across the replicates. And then I like to you can continue to just click down the first replicate and view each different treatment. So the untreated check was fairly consistent. Treatment 4 was mostly consistent, other than this very dark value here. Treatment 2 was a little bit varied as well. And you just kind of continue to kind of look to see. Looks like something a little odd in replicate 2 happened to treatment 5, whereas the rest had pretty good control. And so that can be a nice way as well to look kind of treatment by treatment to see what's going on. And you can always just turn that off to see the whole view. So here, there's a pretty glaringly obvious issue, something strange that's happened with assessment. We've kind of tiptoed around that already with the rating unit min max. But this plot 904 is so much darker than anything around it, than any of the other treatment fours. Really seems like something odd is going on here. So what we can do then is let's go find plot 904. Let me sort by my plot number. And 904 has a value of 120. So not much of a shock here, since we kind of already saw it with the min and max. When we put that on, we have this 120 value, which is literally impossible to have in this assessment, because you can't have 120% of the leaf be covered in disease. So we know this value is wrong. But the question is, what is the right value? And so then that really comes down to what, how you took the data. And I might get on my soapbox a little bit here, so just brace for it a little bit. But if you wrote this down on a piece of paper, of course, we could go to the piece of paper and look to see that, oh, you know what, that was just my fat fingers typing in the values. It's 20. I wrote down 20. It's 20. That's great. And everything is resolved. Well, maybe it was smudged. Maybe I already threw the paper out, and I'm not reviewing this data until a week later, when we actually had a rainy day or whatever. If you don't have a way to verify that, or the scribble I wrote down looks like 120, then what can you do? You're kind of limited in what you can do to resolve this. And in this case, it's clearly not right. There might be cases where it's less obvious, that it's literally impossible to do. Really, then it becomes a matter of, well, when are you doing this data confirmation step? The sooner you can do this step from taking your data, the better off you are. If this is 3 weeks ago, 2 months ago that the data was taken, there's no way you can remember what plot 904 was on July 15th. There's no way you could have any guess, and the only thing you could do is throw it out. But if you have, and we'll kind of advertise, shameless plug for Tablet Data Collector. If you're running ARM in the field and you've recorded the data right in ARM, then you can view that assessment map before you've left the plot, before you've left the trial site at all. You can bring up the assessment map and say, hey, this isn't right. What the heck is going on at plot 904? Well, let's just walk over to plot 904 and see. And so then you can look at it again and decide what actually happened. So, in this case, it's maybe cut and dried, that it's 20. In other cases, you don't know if you didn't have that original source of what the value was. It could have been a 12, it could have been a 10, it could have been 20. You don't know what it was supposed to be when you typed it in. So you really want to do this as soon as possible from entering the data, so you can confirm and catch these outliers. Because the only other thing you can do when you have an invalid value is throw it out. And now you're losing degrees of freedom, and you could be losing even more if maybe there was something strange that happened. So this one's pretty cut and dried. Let's set that to 20 and view the assessment map here. We'll say that one was clear. It was just a typo, and we put it into the trial, but we had a very clear record of the 100 and oops, now I gotta shrink this down a little bit. It really is supposed to be 20. And so now I'll just zoom this out a little bit. Perfect. Now when we draw the map, actually it looks a lot more informative. Previously we had the 120 just kind of pulling everything up. So everything looked, the assessment value looked pretty small relative to that 120. So now there's actually kind of a lot more interesting map here, now that we fixed that 904 to be a more regular number. And so to kind of maybe belabor my point a little bit here, we could look now at plot 203. So now that we fixed that one issue, there still seems to be one value here on the map that is much larger than everything else. So if we go over to plot 203, and I believe if you're on the TDC, I can actually just double click on this plot and it'll take us right there. I'm not sure if it does that in the regular ARM, but I'm using the a demonstration of the tablet data collector features. So may or may not work to double click, but at either rate, coming back to the plot 203, here now we can see we have a 65. So clearly it's much larger than the other assessments that we have, but it's not impossible to have. And so that's really where you're in quite a pickle if you're doing this a week or two later. I don't remember, I don't recall having a plot that was, very disease ridden to that extent. But then again, I don't totally remember. It's been, it's been a lot of days. Whereas if you're doing this very soon after the assessment, you know what, there was a couple spots that were a little crazy. So, you really can't just leave it up to your memory, your gut as to what happened. You need to make sure that these values are correct. So that's really the goal here. And do this as soon as you can to confirm the values so you don't have any incorrect values that are there. And another advantage here, so for the TDC, if you can spot that the 65 is kind of a crazy number, and again, we go back now to the plot, since we haven't left the trial site at all, we can go look to see what happened at 203. And maybe sure enough, this 65, that did happen. The treatment really didn't respond at all, and this plot is just totally overtaken. So now you can do more documentation than just this value. In ARM, you can put in a comment and we can, say there's extreme disease, or maybe there was something in the plot that, that you didn't catch right away, that maybe there's an irrigation line that broke, or it's, anything at all that would matter. You can put in a comment, you can take a picture with the TDC, you can actually take a picture with the tablet itself and a link to this plot. And so you can have all of this extra documentation. So that way later on, if someone else is looking at the trial, they're going to, look at the data and the analysis, and someone comes back and says, well, that can't be 65. That's, so much larger than the rest of this. There's no way. You can say, actually, look at the picture. There really was that much disease here. It's kind of crazy. We don't know why, but you would have all that extra documentation because you caught it at the time when you took the data. And that's really the key, is to do it as soon as possible. So I've got some great questions here. Looks like I'm falling just a little bit behind here. So let me scroll up here a little bit. So just to clarify on the tablet data entry and the TDC. So the tools I'm showing with the assessment map, with the rating unit min max, all of these features are standard with your regular ARM. I am talking about the TDC a little bit. That's a separate add-on where you can install ARM on a tablet and take that tablet out into the field. And as you can see, there's this button here. Then there's a little wizard. It sets up your screen to take data and enter in data into your trial. And so that's a separate add-on. And I've touched on some of the really good reasons why you'd want to use that. But really, I haven't showed any of the features that you wouldn't already have in your main ARM, as far as taking a look at the data. Really, all I've talked about is the advantage that TDC has on putting the data right into ARM while you are physically at the trial site. So you can use some of the tools in ARM, which aren't unique to TDC, just available in ARM. and use those tools while you're still at the trial site to look at the data again. So all these tools here, and I won't show any special features for the TDC. That can be a separate webinar. So hopefully that helps clarify any of the tools here. You'll be able to use however you've taken your data. If you're copy and pasting from a spreadsheet, if you've taken them on a sheet of paper, the assessment map and looking at these plots are all available. And looking at some more comments here, it's a good tool for checking the homogeneity of the pest with the pre-count. So yeah, the nice thing is just depending on your assessment that you're actually performing, that assessment map can really function in different ways. So that's a great point, that if you're doing a pre-count before any treatments are applied, bring up that assessment map, and that would be a heat map of your infestation. So thanks, Pavan. That's a great comment there. And kind of a follow-up question to that idea of seeing those pre-counts. The next question is if there's an option in ARM to set the randomization according to those pre-count values. And so that's a really great question. We've actually had it asked a couple of times in the last couple of years. We don't have a specific feature, like a specific button you can press to do that, but there's a fairly straightforward process that I could email you the steps for. So it is possible to set up your randomization in ARM that way. Essentially, I believe the idea there is that when you're setting up your blocks, so for a randomized complete block design, you want to block according to your variation. And for the classic research example, you're assuming you may have a variation in your field in the soil that then you want to put your blocks in separate rows to capture that variation. Well, in other research, the pest is far more significant. And so you would go out and take a pre-count and then use those pre-count values as your randomization. So find all of the plots that would be the highest level of infestation, and that would become one replicate, even if it's throughout the field. And then another replicate would be, the second highest set, and so on. And so you really find the gradient in a sense of actually the pre-count values there. And so there is a way, and I can send you instructions if you'd like for that. It's a bit of a manual process, but fairly straightforward to get that kind of set your randomization that way in ARM. And then I did get confirmation that the double clicking on the assessment map does not work in the regular version. So I guess that will be one trick. Let me just show that here real quick. The assessment map, when we were looking at the map and we wanted to kind of point out and look at plot 203, I double clicked on this. That probably won't work in your version. But you can, of course, just simply close down, sort by plot number, and go find it manually. And so next question, and something actually I just noticed I should have brought up, this plot 203 that we've just been discussing. You'll notice that I put in a comment and maybe attached a picture. When you add some of this additional information, which appears in the properties panel here, then when you click away from the plot, you'll notice there's actually a little red triangle that appears. So that's a visual indication, we kind of borrowed from Excel, that there's more information attached here. In this case, it's a comment. Really, any of this information, once you include kind of those additional details for that particular assessment, you'll see that information. And so if you want to see that information in a report, you can do that with the assessment data summary report. So that report prints out the plot values for each data column that you have. And so that kind of was the perfect place. In those report options, there's just a button you can say include comments, include barcode. You can choose whichever components you would want to bring across if you want to export any of those extra details into a report of some kind. That would be your assessment data summary. So great questions there. One more here about kind of in the same area with the image attachments. That's really great for photos. It doesn't have to be just for the TDC. If you have a camera or you shoot pictures with your phone, once you get back in from the trial site, you can attach images as well with this button here and attach them to all of your plots or only particular plots. There is some caveats with that. I won't go into great detail, but Philip kind of mentioned some of them. The images themselves don't get embedded in the trial file. They actually are just attachments. So within the trial file here, we're really only saving a link. And so the kind of result from that is if you send this trial file to somebody else, you can't send just the trial file. You would also want to send all of those image files as well. So that's really the trick, is if you send just the trial itself, but you don't bring those picture files, then your client that you sent that to, they won't be able to find those images because they didn't get sent with the trial. And so their ARM is going to say there's all of these images that were attached, but that ARM on their computer can't find them. So that's the key, is to send the pictures along with the trial file. And kind of an automatic way to do that, if you have used the send to feature. So under the file menu, send to, then you can actually send the trial, and there's just a little wizard. You can choose what components to include with, and attachments is one of them. So ARM can automatically go find all of those images and put them all together, attach them into one zip file, which is easy then to send along to your client. So that's a great feature. Kind of adjacent to this, we did actually run a webinar on that. So if you want to check out our webinar archives, if you wanted to kind of see that all in action, we had a good discussion on the finer details of that workflow. Feel free to check that out. All right, great questions. This has been great. I really appreciate the discussion. It seemed like we were set up great last session with good questions, and you guys didn't disappoint. We're here we're running a bunch of questions on this session as well. So this is really great. So I will just check here my list. We really did kind of show the assessment map, the different ways to utilize that. And I think I got my soapbox long enough about really when you want to do the confirmation step here, as soon as you can. So let's show a couple of the other tools that we have available. And again, there's really no magic workflow here. I like to show the assessment map first. I think it's a really good, fast and great tool. But technically speaking, you could do this next tool first if you want. It'll actually be right next to the assessment map. So again, on the properties panel here, the button right above it will display a box whisker graph for this data column. So if you're not familiar with the box whisker graph, just a real quick rundown. This is splitting up by each treatment number we have in the trial. And if we just look at treatment number 1 here, it will draw this box whisker graph here. And really the box portion here is the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile of the data. And then these lines, or the whiskers, extend out to any of the other values that aren't considered outliers. And so there is a specific calculation for what an outlier is, as far as this box whisker is concerned, how the box whisker calculates it. And so it actually takes the height of the box, multiplies it by 1.5. And if you have a data point farther away from the box than that 1.5 times the height of the box, that is considered an outlier. So if we look at treatment number 3, you can see the height of this box is smaller. Just roughly, I'm guessing this is an 11 and maybe a 5, so it's about 6 or so. And so if you imagine stacking that box up here and then maybe another half a box, that would be about as high as you would draw that range. And we can see there's actually a data point that's outside of that range. And so this is it's marked with an X as it is calculated as an outlier. And so if you hover your mouse over that X, you can see in the little tooltip that pops up, it'll actually tell you what plot that is. So plot 705 here is calculated to be an outlier as far as the box whisker goes. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's for sure an outlier that we need to get rid of, but it's definitely a point of interest and a good, much like we did with the assessment map, where we found kind of the really high, or we could have also been looking at very small values. You know, the really extreme data points are a very good starting point to at least look at again. You know, in this case, from a practical standpoint, this looks like it's going to be about 25. So about 25% disease. That's really probably not too exceptional. You know, obviously it was poor control for how well the treatment 3 performed in the rest of the replicates, but maybe not truly an outlier in the fact that, well, this can't possibly happen in a normal situation. So it might not be a reason to throw it away, but it's a great way to, at the very least, find those points that would be worth walking back to that plot if you're still at the site and just double check what actually happened. So that's one utility of the box whisker, is that outlier calculation. Another one, if we go back to kind of the definition of the box whisker, and maybe I'll show treatment 2 here. It's just a little easier to see the lines. And so there are 2 different lines in your box whisker. The dashed line that you see is the mean for that treatment, and the solid line is the median. And so that kind of the difference between those two is a good way to get a sense of the skewness in the data. So if I use treatment 4, for example, you can see that the solid, the median there, sometimes a box whisker will call that the waist, that is much higher than the mean value. And so that high waist really would tell you that there must be a small value that's pulling down the mean. And so we can actually see, it might be hard to see on your screen, but there's little red dots that are the actual the data points. Here you can control that with the display data option. Oh, I click the option, then it moves my screen. My apologies. They're very small here, even on my screen, so I don't know how they show up for you, but there's little red dots, and so I can see there's a little red dot right here on 0. And there's also one here around 5, about 10, 15, and 20. So these smaller values here are really pulling down the mean, whereas the median is much closer to 20. So that just gives a sense that the data is a little skewed, and skewed negatively, I think would be the term. You know, if you think about it in a like a histogram, how it would draw out, you would have the longer tail as the smaller values go. So that can be a rough, you know, kind of a visualization of any skewness to start to kind of get a sense of the normality of these treatments. That kind of comparing those lines there is beneficial. And the last big use, and maybe it should have been the first one that you can use the box whisker for, is just comparing the heights of the boxes. So again, these are each box is a different treatment, and the height of the box is a nice visualization of the amount of variation in that treatment. And so we kind of touched on this last time with the assumptions of AOV, that the AOV analysis desires that all of the treatments have a similar amount of variation. They don't have to have literally the same amount, but similar. And so really we would look at the heights of these boxes, and it really doesn't matter the actual height. This looks like it's about 15, 16 for a height, but we don't really care about that value. It's just relative to all of the other ones. And so you can see treatment 3 is a little less varied. It's a little bit shorter box compared to treatment 2 and the others. So we may see as we go into the next session, when we want to look at the assumptions of AOV and run some statistical tests, we might find out that there is a slight homogeneity of variance problem because there's a little variation. But we can at least get a feel for that right now without having to go so far as to run a literal test and know for sure. Again, we're just kind of confirming the data, taking a look, making sure it all looks normal. And maybe if we look at this outlier here and resolve that, maybe it will turn out that it was supposed to be 15 instead of 25, and suddenly all of the boxes will be about the same, just depending on what actually occurred in the trial. But those are really the three main things you would look at for the box whisker. And again, just like we did on the assessment map, there's the next column, previous column. And every time I press a button, it just slides my graph to my other screen. But in this case, I only have the one column of data. So there is not a second column to go to. But a lot of these tools have a nice way just to move on to the next column. So you could be looking at 5 assessments at once. If you were counting 5 different weeds, or copy and pasting data from a CRO or something, you can review several columns at a time, just stepping through each one kind of one by one. So that's the box whisker graph. So now we're going to go back over here to where we found that properties panel. And there's a couple of other tools that I think in the future might be condensed a little bit. You'll notice when we found the properties panel, there's also a column properties and a column diagnostics. So originally, just kind of history of ARM features, column properties was added first after the original properties as kind of a tool for data review. However, this is maybe getting a little outdated. It does have the one tool I want to highlight, and that would be this Outliers Calculator. So I would recommend kind of just ignoring this section up here. We kind of have newer tools to utilize here, but you can come to the Outliers Calculator. And so there's actually 3 different methods you could use to calculate an outlier. And there might actually be more out there, just depending on which statistician you may talk to. But in ARM, we really have 3 options for you to pick. And so there's an option for the box whisker. We kind of talked about how that is calculated. And we actually saw we had a box whisker outlier found in the graph. If you didn't want to visualize that on the graph, you can still find if there is any outliers based on the box whisker definition just by selecting that option and pressing the Find Next. And you'll see what happened is we actually moved the cursor right to that. Plot 203 was the first outlier we found. I'll do that one more time because it happens a little fast. I did have my cursor just in plot 101, just because we were talking through different things. But then if I go to the outliers and press find next, it will move the cursor to the plot for the first outlier it finds, according to the box whisker calculation. And then if I press find next again, if there was another value, it would move to the next one. You can also use the standard deviation value to determine whether something is an outlier or not. And so you can choose plus or minus 3 standard deviations or plus or minus 2 standard deviations from the grand mean. And again, you can press find next. In this case, it finds that 65 again. If I press it again, it's not moving anywhere else. So there's just that one value. If I loosen it up a little bit and press find next, we'll see if we find anything else. So now if you're looking at plus or minus 2 standard deviations, this plot 801 could also be considered an outlier. And we come back to that 203. So I think the key here really is to remember an outlier. If you're using a statistic of any sort to kind of calculate an outlier, that is just a tool to point out a value of interest. I really would discourage anyone from just saying, oh, this is an outlier, we should throw it out, we shouldn't use it. But instead, really in this data confirmation step, calculate outliers to give you a short list of plots to look at, to reevaluate, to consider, does this make sense? Or is this unusual? Should we go and maybe document this even more, because it is what happened. We recorded the value, right? But it is very unique, and we want to really document this and maybe understand it more. And if I, let's just see here, if I change these values, which you would never do just haphazardly like this, but I just kind of want to show that here, now that I've changed that one value that kept marking as an outlier, just for demonstration's sake. Now that I select a plus or minus 3, you'll notice the button is grayed out. So that is an indication that there are no outliers that are calculated according to whichever option you've chosen. So that, again, that was definitely not something you would do in a normal situation, just haphazardly change it, but just to demonstrate what it would look like if there was no outlier calculated. So I am going to go back to the properties section and just highlight if you do decide that the outlier that you have is not representative of what really happened, and you want to throw out that value so it's not in the analysis. You don't have to simply delete. So we'll say this 65 here we've decided is not really indicative of what should have happened. You don't have to just delete the 65 out of there so that ARM doesn't use it in the analysis. There is a damaged flag, a little checkbox here, right where we were putting in a comment and a picture, and you can turn that damaged marker on. And what that does, if I click away here, you can see it'll put a little cross through on that 65. And so you can keep the recorded value as you had recorded it, but when we go to the analysis, ARM will treat this plot 203 for column 1 as a missing data point. So it will not be included in the analysis, but you can still have all of the documentation of what was recorded for that plot. So just once again, since it's a little small, over on your properties panel, there's the checkbox for damaged. And that will throw out the value when it comes to the analysis without making you, eliminate the documentation that you may have for that. And again, just because it's unusual data doesn't mean that it's, truly damaged, not usable. you really want to consider the ramifications of throwing out data and not just blindly getting rid of it because some tool in on the screen said it's an outlier, so I shouldn't use it. You really want to investigate it as and look at the research behind it instead of just relying on some calculator that tells you that. So the final tool I want to show is actually this column diagnostics panel. And we will spend a lot of time with this panel next session. This is really the main tool for reviewing the data, but there's just a few items here that really do fall in the data confirmation step. So I do kind of want to highlight them. Real quick, before I dive into that, I see a question talking about the damage flag. So before we get too far away, confirming that damaged values are still considered in calculations. And so if you were to create a calculation from data column 1, this 65 will be used. That is right. If you were using that column to generate a new column of data, that will be used. And so you would want to kind of review when you create that calculated column. It's up to you to go in. So let's just say this is my, I'll put the calculation into data column 3, whatever calculation we would use. It would be up to the researcher to decide if the resulting value should also be thrown out. So we don't bring across that damaged marker into a calculated column. So that way you could decide, because it really just depends on the research and the situation. There's sometimes where it's, well, obviously, if that plot was damaged, any calculated value from that is also damaged and should be thrown out. But there's other cases where it might not be. And so it really is up to the person creating that calculation then to review that if this is damaged, should the calculated value also be damaged? And you could just go in and turn on that damaged marker for that plot in the calculated column 2. So great point to add there as you use your recorded data in other calculated columns. Something to consider there. So real quickly here, we're just about to our end of our time, but I just kind of wanted to show this column diagnostics. The top portion here has some statistics. I don't know if that's quite the right term. That has kind of a loaded term here. We'll really just call them little tools here that describe the data. So I'm clicking into the data column we want to look at. Then on this panel, this top portion here, the first few lines actually are really more informative for the data. And so N would be number of data points. So we have 50 data points across all of our replicates and treatments. 9 of them are unique. So you saw a lot of them are kind of increments of 5. So we really don't end up having a huge variation there. 49 are analyzed. And the next 3 options here kind of tell you why that analyzed didn't match the number we have total. And in this case, I don't have any that are missing. I don't have any plots that are empty, but I do have one that's marked as damaged. So that can give you a nice rundown after you finish entering the data. Oh, wait, there's an empty plot. That's not right. I know I took data on all of them, so you can go back and review. Oh, oops, I skipped over plot, 402 for whatever reason. So that can be helpful just to give a rundown of what data points are there and kind of what they look like. If you're looking at percent, percent or pressure of some sort, and really you were expecting a column of all zeros because there really was no weeds yet that early in the research. That unique value could be helpful there. Wait a minute, there's 2 unique values. I thought they're all zeros. Go find the one that accidentally was a 1 instead of 0 or whatever. Just a nice rundown of what those data points are. And I think just moving forward, we do hope to kind of combine these two. You'll hear a little bit of that next session as we talk about the data review. That there, over the years, there's been a change in the industry, kind of how what statistical methods are typically done. And so we've have some tools in ARM that were really the tools to use 15 years ago. And now the industry has kind of shifted towards using some different calculations, different methods. And so right now we're kind of in a balancing act in ARM that we still want historical tools to be available. So if you open up a trial from 2005 and you want to emulate that, the analysis, the report printout you had, we want you to be able to do that. But at the same time, of course, we want the new tools for this research season to do things statistically the way everyone's doing them. And so we're kind of at crossroads, I would say, a little bit on some of the tools. And that's really highlighted with column diagnostics is the new latest and greatest way. But some of the things in the column properties and some options in the report are still there and available to you. And we'll kind of show the difference in the next two sessions on what you'd want to use, at least from the more modern approach, and what are kind of the more historical tools. So with that, that's really all the main tools I think you would find for data confirmation. Do it as soon as you can after you take the data and solidify the data that is in the trial. So that's really if you're sponsoring the data, really we'd be hammering this home for that trialist person doing the data. When they take it and put it in the software, you want these steps, and that's really the goal of this session. And then the next phase is, all right, we've got our data. What are we going to do with it? And preparing it for the analysis and starting to make some conclusions. That's the data review, and that'll be on Thursday. So I do have one real question here, quick question here. Probably noticing the IID on the screen, and we will talk about that next session. So that'll be part of the data review process, and we'll spend most of the session here, just like you see it on my screen now, looking at the column diagnostics and talking about how to work with that tool for reviewing the data. So we've reached the end of the hour. I do have a few minutes for questions that I can hang on the line if you wish, but to respect people's time, I also don't want to keep anyone too long. So I'll just quick thank everyone for joining us today. If you do have some questions, feel free to shoot them across here before. But thanks everyone. Hopefully we'll see you again on Thursday when we talk about the data review. So I got a question here. We'll say thanks to those that are leaving, feel free. Those want to hang around. I have one question on the rating min max. And yes, so kind of we started out the day on that. I did it a little quick, but the rating unit min max, that does replace some of the action codes. And so I think I had mentioned P as one of them. Let me see where I've got my action codes list, but you highlighted another one. So there was a plus sign, but you'll actually notice we don't have any of those anymore. We've actually took out that list. There was, P was for the percent. The plus sign was forcing values only to positive. There was a handful of other ones. Some of them related just to the EPO rating scale 0 to 5, things like that. But we did replace that. And so functionally, we made ARM smart enough to combine those. So if you did have a trial from 2 years ago where there was a plus sign in the action code, you may notice when you open it, there's no longer a plus sign. But what happened is it just converts it automatically into the equivalent in the min max. So in this case, a plus sign really means you have a floor of 0. So now I cannot enter in a negative value. This is on my other screen, but it's telling me that's not okay because you have a limit of 0 as the smallest number. And then the same thing for, if I just clear that out, we did the same thing for P. Again, that'll work for any historical trials, then it'll just automatically kind of convert that, whatever you had in the action code here. Yeah, so we want to make sure, of course, not to break historical trials, won't start giving you a hard time, and it just converts it. And now really the goal was everything is done in one spot, because it was really confusing. Some of the rate units ARM did this automatically before, even though there wasn't an explicit minimum and maximum, it would have that same logic. Percent was one of them. Well, that was confusing. Well, there's so many different ways to do this one thing. So we kind of compacted everything together, put it all into something very explicit that everyone can see. There's a minimum and a maximum here for the rating unit I'm doing, and that's how it works. So great question. And hopefully that transition works smoothly for you, and if you're working with the historical trials. But one other question here, there's a zoom in the corner. So that is related also to the tablet data collector. Right before I started today's session, I kind of debated when I saw that I had it. I was like, well, that'll be nice because it comes up. It's kind of related to this discussion, and of course, it's good advertising for the importance of it. But that zooming is part of the tablet data entry or tablet data collector set. So you can't add it automatically to your ARM. There's a functional way to do that. If you did want to enlarge your ARM, because this is technically how that zoom just works, is in your tools options on the display section, you can change your font size. So let me find the program font. Here we go. So by default, we just start with the sans serif 8. If you wanted to, increase, a 50% zoom, essentially, you could just change it to 12. And you can see everything will change. Of course, my screen's a little weird to keep popping me back and forth, but now everything's larger. And that's actually all that zoom does, is it just kind of tweaks that. So that would be kind of a manual way. Again, just your program font in your display if you wanted to change that. Good question. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for the great questions and the good session here. And hopefully we'll see you here in a couple of days when we can do the data review. So thank you.